Well, hello, old friends. We've missed you.
Hello.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Southern Oregon Soil holding it down for the first student in class. What up, what up? Medically Fit is in and apparently still needs to let us know about winning. All those items have been shipped out either today or tomorrow. So I'm a little laggy. That's why I'm not in charge of product distribution. But what's up to everybody? But yeah, all your goodies from last week are on their way. Shout out to Smiley's Garden. I do believe we've officially scheduled Smiley as our first podcast interview guest next Wednesday. So shout out to the homie.
Should be a good time.
It should be a good time.
Yeah.
What would you like to talk about, Miss Sarah?
I think we're going to talk about something about success, right? Clear path. Keep it fun, lighthearted.
You're reading the show notes, Sarah. But, who put a question mark on the teleprompter? We wanted to talk about success. We've had a few conversations in the past few days that are the types of conversations that we're having more and more often, honestly. And you're starting to see people take this living soil thing extremely seriously. And you're starting to see a merging of organic farmers moving into more specifically living soil techniques. And you're starting to see flat out salt growers ditching that nasty shit and jumping into the living soil. So if you're one of those dudes or women,
Yep. Thank you.
Got to keep everybody, can't be excluding nobody.
No.
But anyways, there's a lot of people moving to this goofy little kooky trend called living soil, which our beautiful home and planet Earth has been doing for roughly 3 billion years, or somewhere around 2,000, depending on what church you go to. But nonetheless, for a long-ass time, nature's been doing this thing called living soil cultivation.
Figured a few things out, I think.
I think one of the things I've learned the most from the planet Earth is that lots of little containers really isn't the strategy. The planet seems to try and put all the plants in one single container, sometimes casually separated by water or cliffs, I guess.
Mountain ranges.
But nonetheless, to me, it seems like one big old container.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the important components. And I just wanted to, you're the best too. Thank you. We appreciate that you appreciate what we're trying to do. I guess I got to not cover Sarah's face with the quick comments. At some time in this thing, I'll figure out how to make the comments look beautiful. But for now, carry on. So nonetheless, I think we need a little bit of a kind of a backtrack history lesson to try and figure out all the different veins that got us to here in this living soil and what of those aspects are beneficial for us moving forward and what are those techniques that are actually downright detrimental to the entire experience. And so it's really common for people to follow paths of travel through different cultivation strategies into now living soil system. And in our world, we see a lot of those worlds merging. We do a lot of analytics of those worlds merging. And from our viewpoint, it's pretty clear as to what will help you out and what will not help you out. And I think financially speaking, it doesn't matter if you're a legacy farmer navigating in the non-taxed markets, we'll say, or if you're a commercial regulated facility operating in the remarkably taxed groups. Both groups are being pinched right now, and I think we're entering a new requirement for cultivators for managing their fiscal responsibility of their cultivation operation. And while managing your money, essentially, and monitoring cash in and cash out, there's certain aspects that continue to make your experience more and more expensive. One of the strategies that comes up a lot is a lot of the organic farmers are coming from a disposable soil world. And I think one of the things that people lose complete sight of or track of or even have a reference point of what's going on is most of the feed strategies and cultivation practices that were developed in that world of turning and burning soil are remarkably antagonistic to permanent soils. And whereas some people might be aware that our agricultural farmers are destroying their soils, cannabis farms get an opportunity to do that 4 more times per year and to much greater extent because they can afford on the smaller scales to go way harder on nutrients. And so everything's rapidly accelerated in these cultivation techniques. And so from a disposable soil standpoint, you're up against a lot of obstacles. One of those main obstacles is the variation in soil making from any soil blender is insanely varied. You would literally be shocked at how much variation is in even just a 100-yard batch of soil. Sometimes we see situations where 2 single 4x8 beds are literally 100% different from a soil chemistry standpoint. And so when you go from a disposable soil mindset, you're increasing your vulnerability as a cultivator for pest, disease, low yields, problems by constantly bringing in this new variable of soil. Oftentimes, almost all the times, zero calculation or quantification of that soil from a soil chemistry standpoint. So most of the times the cultivators don't even know what the heck is going on from a chemistry standpoint, or even have access to the information that would indicate how dysfunctional that soil chemistry actually is. In our work, there's 2 major obstacles to larger beds and permanent soil situations. On the commercial side, typically the person paying for it is not super stoked about the large bill of a large volume of a proper living soil base. That is something that's made with intention, that has certain characteristics like clay components, proper aeration, desirable compost in the commercial space, low heavy metals and toxicity. And so that starts to sway people towards pots, smaller pots, and disposable soil. From the cultivator side,
Because they think that's how they're going to have to manage that.
they think that's how they're going to manage it, exactly. Yeah. And from a cultivator standpoint, usually the farmer itself, whether it's small scale or massive scale, is dead afraid of a soil turning and burning on them and causing complete havoc to be wreaked, because everybody that grows in soil has had a situation where there's a run or two where all hell breaks loose. And yeah, Smiley, you would be absolutely mind blown the level of variation in particular bags. We've seen a lot of situations where people will even get a couple yards in bags on a pallet. And what people don't realize is like half of those bags might have come from batch 1, which happened before lunch. And then half those bags might be coming from batch 2, which came after a smoke break, and they forgot to put the amendments in it. And you've got this soil with the same label from the same batch, and in your mind it's identical. It could be 100, 200, 300% varied. And it's a remarkable variation. And it's like a fractal. The more you look at it, the wider it gets. But by far, the biggest obstacle to any organic cultivator is working on the disposable soil model. I don't believe that really has much life left in the cannabis space from a financial standpoint.
And from a planet standpoint, we have to think about things like that.
Yeah. You do need to think about things like that. And we are starting to experience availability of the raw materials to make soil. And then as more farmers start to move into living soil, we're putting more demand on those supply streams. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of negatives in my book. For me, from an environmental standpoint, it's completely ridiculous to scoop out bogs of peat, which are nice living systems, providing benefit to the ecosystem, and we just scoop them out, run a bunch of nutrients through them and throw it away. It's just insane to me. So I think one of the main components, or one of the essential non-negotiable components, is a large permanent soil. And that does scare most people, and it should. There's only a few suppliers of soil that are taking this seriously about what chemistry and what minerals need to be in that soil and should be in that soil, and what's the composition of that product itself. And so this makes it incredibly difficult.
And it's, if you take the mindset that you need to take care of this soil, mm-hmm. then it's a win-win situation, because the outcome could potentially be the best soil. It could potentially get better and better and better. And mm-hmm. that's really what the experience should be like. Mm-hmm. You should be able to get more biology in there, establish better biology over time with the way that you treat it. And if we're not looking at these things, then we don't know that that's what's happening. But you can tell on the end result of what your plant is telling you. So.
Exactly. And so figuring out the foundational principles for what soil chemistry is needed for a larger volume and a permanent soil, that's essential. It is difficult to come into that information. You know, most of the people that have that information hold it pretty tight. Up until the last year or so, there's only been a few people providing mineral recommendations to cannabis farmers. You're starting to see more people come online. We're offering a master class to massively multiply that number of people that are capable of producing that type of math and service. So you're going to start seeing a lot more people able to do that math. And you're just starting to see it more widely accepted and available. So soil is an essential component. You need to be testing that. If you're a small single light garden, I still have yet to see a situation where a farmer spent $25, $35, $65 on a soil test and didn't get that back in yield. I have yet to see a situation where the farmer did not recoup the cost of soil testing, even at the most micro of scales. On the other side, at the larger scale, everything is magnified. You know, it's to me, it's non-negotiable for any farm that I would deem commercial. That doesn't mean if you're a 4-lighter in the back bedroom, if you have to pay that electric bill with that product, you are a commercial enterprise and you need to manage your situation as such. Unless you don't need the flower to pay for that electric bill.
But I mean, I think we're just in times where you need to be able to strategically manage the nutrition, the inputs and nutritional side of things, especially when you're trying to grow with living soil. Even if you're not growing cannabis, even if you're growing veggies, you know, or orchards or whatever, you need to be able to manage strategically the nutrition, because the other inputs of the problems that you get when you don't manage nutrition properly, like, you know, pest pressure and disease, come with that. So if you don't manage it, you're going to pay for it somewhere, right?
Which is part of the problem, I think. So most of the organic sector is coming from a place where they're using Fox Farms, using Happy Frog, using whatever. Almost none of those products come anywhere near the desirable target from a soil chemistry standpoint that is suitable for really any plant cultivation from my viewpoint. And when you start to do a Logan Labs Malic 3 analysis of something like Fox Farms or Happy Frog or whatnot, numerically they match a general hydroponics solution. So the amount of calcium and the amount of potassium are more similar to what would be in a hydroponic reservoir, because that is who has been driving those products and what needs to go into those products. And if you have only ever been growing in a bagged soil from a hydroponic farm, you're guaranteed been slowly, lowly, gently, massively battling pests. I can 100% guarantee that.
At some level.
The reason why that is calcium is maybe 1/4 of what it should be. Once it gets down below that certain level, you are 100% certain that you will have pests. Now, in a hydroponic situation, you can have a really good environment, you can have really good clean practices, you can have good healthy genetics, and you can maintain those same ratios between calcium and potassium and have decent results and often low pests. Once you get into a living soil, it's pretty much a nightmare. And there are some conversations going in the comments about particular soil brands that have had problems. Every single person that makes large volumes of soil has got their nuts kicked in a couple times. I've had it myself. I've gone through remarkable leaps to produce a good quality, consistent product. I've still had 2 or 3 batches that came out and caused a significant problem. It's just kind of the way it goes. For the brand in the comments right now, I've seen some where his was actually quite good, and then I've seen some where it's absolutely atrocious. And I think that has to do with scale. Systemically, what's happening is there's not near enough compost available for the soil needs on the planet right now. And so every now and then,
suitable anyway.
Yeah, so every now and then a batch of soil gets worm compost from a place that digests construction waste or something ridiculous like that. You get car batteries and broken bottle caps and whatnot. And it's happened to everybody. I had a batch a couple years ago that the old switcheroo from a compost company happened on me, caught me by surprise. And so sometimes the soil blender doesn't even know what's going on, and they have done their due diligence. It's just the nature of soil making in general. And so that's why, as the farmer, it is 100% your responsibility to quantify what you're working with and not rely on one soil test posted on a website. You never get the soil batch that soil test came from. I can 100% promise you the people that post those soil tests cherry pick. They'll send 5 or 6 in and pick the nicest one. Even if it's a good one or a bad one, it's never the batch that you got. You need to at least do a basic soil test to see where you're at and then correct it appropriately, in my opinion, to the Mehlich 3 test based on the Albrecht principles. You can't neglect the solubility aspect and the saturated paste test. I just have seen lots of times in our consulting work that if you try to do living soil focusing on the saturated paste test, you can improve health and you can improve outcome over not doing anything, but I've yet to see those yields really blow anything out of the water, in my opinion. So in order to get that yield up, you have to get the numbers on the Mehlich 3 test to a certain level. You have to get those base saturation levels to at least in a reasonable range, while then also managing the saturated paste test as well. So in later weeks, maybe not next week because we'll be talking to Smiley, but the week after, we can go over some of these soil tests and we can dive deeper in some of these and we can produce some other videos. As of today, I don't have anything to show you, just to kind of break it down because it can be so insanely complex. But nonetheless, soil needs to be treated as a permanent soil. It needs to be treated in a regenerative fashion, like actually regenerative fashion, not just wearing a hat and hashtagging it. Like you literally need to come up with a strategy that is regenerative. And which comes to the next part is how do you treat that soil? So most organic farmers are using a dry top dress. I've spoke about these in the past before, and I got some interesting conversation back and forth thinking, or not thinking, but maybe interpreting that I was speaking poorly on some of the products, which to me, they're all fine products. It's just when you make a one-size-all organic top dress product, it is a perfect match for no soil.
That's right.
And, typically those products, they're competing against hydroponic labels. So people are looking for a label with a high analysis. So any of them, whether it's Green Grow, who I'm actually a fan of, the owner of that company is an insanely solid human being, produces great products. We've done a lot of work with Mr. B's Green Trees in Southern California and Northern California. It works. Growrilla used to be great, but they got bought out and shelved. A lot of people use BioLive. That'd be kind of like my least desirable. But nonetheless, when they're trying to produce those products, there's an NPK value that needs to go on the label. And if you put the amount of calcium that is actually appropriate to balance out the magnesium and potassium and whatnot in that soil, you will drive those percentage numbers down to well below zero and nobody will buy a 000. So in order to produce a 455 or whatever it is you're buying, there's barely enough calcium in there. And I would say somebody like Green Grow is at least cognizant of that and does put some level of calcium in there. The downstream effect of that, whether you're doing Green Grow or BioLive or Mr. B's or Build a Soil, you will 100% of the time end up extremely deficient in calcium, way too high in magnesium, and way too high in potassium, and often way too high in nitrogen. The consequence of that is biblical bug populations. Calcium and magnesium push and pull against each other in the soil. Calcium has a pushing force, magnesium has a pulling force. And if you do not have the calcium and magnesium ratios at least reasonable in that soil, you are going to have a tight, compacted soil that does not allow oxygen, that does not promote root infiltration, and it's just downhill from there, pretty much. And from a biological standpoint, this is where we jump off the soil food web train and say you have to manage soil chemistry, because we have seen time and time again that when you correct these base saturation levels and the calcium to magnesium ratios in a soil, you do get better biological establishment, which I do believe has to do with oxygen. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to remember that anytime a human is in charge of a natural system, it becomes a little less natural, right? So you've removed it from nature's system, it would just pop up weeds if it needed to mine some calcium. It would pop up all kinds of things. You'd have inputs. Nature is not a water only. You're constantly having dying plants and dying insects and dying animals and all poop and all kinds of stuff is inputting into the soil in a truly natural system, right? So we've removed it from it and said we're going to corral it and we're going to do this and we want you to perform this way, but we don't, we have to manage the nutritional and microbial side of that if we're going to take over that, that system. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, I guess which brings us to kind of our another point is managing biological matters.
Yeah.
And this is a real perplexing one to me because, I got the Soil Food Web tattoo in like 2013 and went head first. Met my wife that way. It's pretty cool. Have gone much farther down the rabbit hole than really any other humans, save for maybe Nick Tomasini has gone as deep as we have. And we're really out there on the tip of the spear for biological matters. And I've done analysis of everything from city parks to famous botanical gardens, massive acreages of vegetables, home gardeners. We've analyzed every cultivation activity that you can imagine and put the microscope to it and quantified that process. And the kind of interesting thing to me about biological matters is it's remarkably unchanged in its understanding in the last 10 years. And when I came in 2013, with a microscope, none of what was being done was anywhere near close what Dr. Lane was teaching as far as tea brewing, equipment, and what have you. And so as far back as 2013, 2014, I really tried my best to get people away from Vortex brewers and airlift brewers. Those, plain and simple, are 100% disease factories, and up until recently held the trophy for crop loss champions, which has now actually been taken over by K&F. And so you have to understand that regardless of how much you love an activity or how much you value a certain tea brewing practice or whether how much you have invested into tea brewing equipment, you are doing animal husbandry. You are raising animals, you are breeding cats and dogs, and they have conditions that need to be met to have the healthiest organisms produce benefit for your plant. And so where people get sideways on tea brewing is if you take a lot of organic nutrients and you put it in with compost, the organisms in that compost, good, bad, or indifferent, doesn't matter how close or far it is from biologically complete, those organisms are going to start breaking down and digesting those organic nutrients. So at the end of that tea brew, you are provided with a biological digestion of organic compounds that have been reduced into more plant available forms. But the consequence is you spent 2, 3, 4 days literally brewing disaster and making powdery mildew pressure. And the benefit that people see from that, which they often term beneficial plant growth response, so you see a growth in plant that you associate as beneficial. What people don't associate is the powdery mildew pressure and the mite pressure and the crop loss in serious situations that was literally introduced in that tea brewing activity or repeatedly introduced into that tea brewing activity.
There might have been a delay in that
response. So the immediate response is the soluble level of nutrients, which got you closer to a hydroponic response, which the plant responds. But then you, at minimum, inoculated way more than I would ever want anywhere near your soil. No matter how much hydrogen peroxide you throw through that thing, you're not going to do it. If there's any parts, pieces, or components in there, you're not going to do it. The crazy thing to me is, like, I went to a Lane workshop in 2013. She was trying to communicate no airlift, no parts, no bits and pieces, no air stones, none of that. And we're here in 2022, and it's still really hard to convince people that you should drop that stuff. And we've counted literally hundreds of farms where that's the sole problem, literally the sole problem. So managing biology is an extremely difficult thing. So I don't know. What do you think?
It's impossible if you're not, it's difficult if you're not actually looking at it with a microscope or having somebody look at it with a microscope. Because you just don't, it's like if you're trying to utilize this microbial team, right? They do so much for you and so much work, and they're providing all this nutrition to your plants and converting things and speaking genetically to the plant and all kinds of amazing things that they provide, you need to be able to understand everything that you do affects them. Every input affects them. Every input is a food source for somebody or is possibly harming them. So if you aren't looking at what those thresholds are, you're not going to be able to manage to that until you train your eye. So if you can think of the microscope as something to retrain your intuition or your gardener's sense about where we should go with the watering, where we should go with inputs and things like that, you can start to understand how the microbes see it, and then they can be of the ultimate benefit to the system. So you'd start to think like they do, and anything that comes into the system will affect them. So yeah.
Biology is a whole ball of wax, and the difficult part is it was extremely difficult to come into contact with the actual method from Dr. Elaine even as a few years ago. It's getting more and more accessible, but it's the most expensive it's ever been, which makes it less accessible. But nonetheless, there's still far more people on the planet that are capable of doing this math technique than have ever been before. The real difficult part for the cultivator is pretty much most of what you're seeing on social media is literally teaching you to harvest disease. We kind of keep going back and forth with this omycete thing. There's people out there promoting that they're beneficial. We see it quite a bit. That influence is remarkably strong, actually. And these people are literally teaching you how to go out of business. And from my standpoint, we've seen since 2016 that this is just a complete disaster. And so you have to figure out and decipher and sift through the information that's available and try to determine who is somebody that's actually familiar with the different organism groups, what their role are with higher level plants. Cannabis would be a higher level plant. It's not an aquatic plant. And so when you have these water molds, which we would term omycetes, which is a simplification of a massive organism group. But nonetheless, when we put organisms that have certain characteristics and colors and shapes into one category, and we put other organisms that have certain characteristics and lack of color, really, into a different category, that relationship determines everything about your outcome. In my opinion, of all the different analytics that we employ into our business, from water chemistry with a hydroponic mindset, to soil chemistry from an organic soil mindset, to biology, the most accurate indicator of outcome is the relationship between what we determine fungi and what we determine as omycetes based on the Dr. Elaine scale. And so you really want to try and familiarize yourself with those people that are guiding you towards this fungi category and not the people that are guiding you towards this omycete category. We've seen a lot of really passionate people about different techniques. We have yet to see a human overcome remarkable powdery mildew pressure that comes with doing activities that chase this omycete value. Yeah. That's a whole nother ball of wax. But, do you have anything to add to that? Or?
I think even there's just some misconceptions about what even is a fungal food, how to feed them, and so when you take the Soil Food Web journey and you're doing the training with Elaine, you do a lot of testing, and you get to know how these organisms react to the different. At least if you've tinkered around and you're trying to get this thing called fungal dominant, right? We did a lot of testing because back in the day biologically complete compost wasn't available just readily everywhere. You just had to figure out, it was pretty much nowhere. And so you had to make it, you had to figure out, tinker with what you did have to see what you could grow and what responded and how and all those things. And she, you do it under her advice and under the advice of your own eyes on the microscope as well, but you get to see, how these things respond. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is thinking that fish hydrolysate is a fungal food. And I think that she even teaches, and I'm pretty sure I just saw it in her manual, that fish hydrolysate is a fungal food. I've never seen fish hydrolysate actually stimulate beneficial fungi. So, and this is something that we were just discussing with some of the other Soil Food Web consultants, is that we've literally never really seen fish hydrolysate only stimulate beneficial fungi. It seems to really stimulate mostly the oomycetes. So I know that that's a favorite input of most organic growers, and I just want to caution you, and we can get really attached to these things that we've relied on, but I just want to caution you that food source, even at a whiff of it, really is an oomycete. It seems to stimulate only the oomycetes. I've not seen
You
much benefit.
can get a little bit, but I think it's off to the races.
Yeah,
And then when we've gone to commercial cannabis facilities and done tremendous analysis going backwards through the process all the way through the inputs, if you put fish hydrolysate that's been in a tote at a farm under the microscope, typically it's quite easy to find these, what we determine oomycetes, or define as oomycetes rather, based on certain characteristics of Dr. Lane's scale. And in 100% of our experience, those are the main indicator of powdery mildew pressure. And then once they get to a certain level, you're pretty much guaranteed things like russet mites, broad mites, really problematic pests in the situation. Yeah. So navigating the biological aspect of the living soil world is by far the most difficult component.
Yeah,
and
because everything is a food source for them. So you just have to understand who you're stimulating at what level. And
context is remarkably different. Like one of the most memorable experiences we ever had in our early years of consulting is we were brewing tea inside of a greenhouse in the morning, and then we would start tea brews on a farm outside in the evenings, and we used the same exact recipes and the same exact compost, and those two outputs could not have been more remarkably different. And just the outcome of being 2-3 miles down the road and outside, even using the same exact components, brought about a totally and completely different outcome. And that was the point in our consulting history in about 2016 where we even stopped trying to brew tea on site during a site visit because it just was so goddamn problematic. Yeah. And one of the original things that I used to get paid for in the beginning was showing up to a farm and teaching you how to brew compost that met the standards of Dr. Lane. And I did that for a couple years, and there was some benefit that came from that. But the longer we did that, the more we realized that tea can just be this extremely volatile technique that really might just try to take you out. So that's some kind of things there. So there's a question about recommending fish hydrolysate in any circumstances. No, we've abandoned it since we pretty much saw enough in 2017.
I don't put it in my tea. I don't use it in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I know.
And there's one is the biological aspect, which I just mentioned, but also the chemistry aspect. It starts to really negatively affect the chemistry behavior in the soil because it increases the exchangeable hydrogen, which becomes like a free radical, these hydrogen ions. So we don't do any fish hydrolysate at all. So we're still using products that provide nitrogen and things like that, although we do it in a little bit different of a way because we're leaning on our microbes more. But we're looking for very specific targets of nutrition, specifically to manage the ultimate health of the plant without bringing about pests and disease. And that can only be done in today's market by literally managing the individual components rather than buying something off the shelf, which throws you into a ratio that pretty much demands pests and disease. So
literally the biblical creation of pests. And so what kind of happens on the fish hydrolysate journey is that's been a very common strategy. We've worked for many cultivators that do a fish hydrolysate kelp humic acid type strategy, or a fish hydrolysate nectar of the gods, fish hydrolysate biobiz, any of those deals. The consequence is when you're throwing away your soil, you've lost track of the damage to that soil you're doing with that fish hydrolysate, especially at the higher levels, like the 40, 50, 60 milliliters per gallon of fish hydrolysate, which a lot of people run. We've worked with literally millions of square feet of cultivators that use fish hydrolysate. One organization in particular was 1 million square feet running fish hydrolysate, and we got to see the effects of this product at 26 different properties, indoor, outdoor greenhouse that all ran fish hydrolysate, and that we analyzed all of those farms. That was where I got off the train, 2017. We've tried to incorporate it into our consulting, but we ditched that completely in maybe 2018, which was about the same time the Organics Alive soluble powders came out, and we've worked very closely with Todd and Eric at Organics Alive on those products and to continue improving those products. And there's no convincing me to go backwards from those soluble powder products. So when you look at it from our viewpoint of somebody that has analyzed the financial aspects of a commercial cultivation facility, one of the things we do is a lot of spreadsheet calculations. This whole week, I've done ridiculous amounts of spreadsheet forecasting and analytics of farms for some projects we're working on. And when you look at it from just a number standpoint, if you're doing a disposable soil strategy with fish hydrolysate, economically, you got pretty much no chance into the future, in my personal opinion. Financially, you're just not going to make it. And so the sooner you change strategies, the better shot you got of continuing further on into the future. But in 2017, we were able to determine that that was not a financially viable strategy for any scale. So if you then try to keep that soil and you continue pounding it with fish hydrolysate, the compounds that are used to stabilize the fish hydrolysate build up in the soil, which is what is measured on the Logan lab test as exchangeable hydrogen. Exchangeable hydrogen only starts to appear when the pH is below 7. The fish hydrolysates are typically 3, 4, 5 pH, so they're also very good at driving the pH down. Usually there's a lot of acid. The very high quality products will use phosphoric acid, but most of them don't, and most of them use something else that contributes to these hydrogen. I'm not a chemistry major, so I can't fully break it down, but the downstream effects are this exchangeable hydrogen builds up in the permanent soil. It starts to act like a free radical tying up nutrients, seems to cause the most problems with calcium. All cells to be healthy need a calcium to fill it properly. And so once you start that process, if you look at the Logan lab test, there's an exchangeable hydrogen value. We typically try to keep it below 12. When we've worked long-term with farms that are using fish hydrolysate, BioBiz, whatever, any of those real rich, fishy products, as soon as exchangeable hydrogen starts to get over 12, 13, 15, they start to get the bug problems. By the time you get to 22, 25, you're absolutely battling aphids or can be root aphids. If you're over 30, 40, 50, which is really common on like a third, fourth, fifth cycle on a soil with fish hydrolysate, you are flat out biblical portions of root aphids and just plain and simple all hell's breaking loose. We spent a lot of time working with farms trying to reduce this number, so dropping down to 10, 20 mils per gallon of fish hydrolysate, and then you start to lose the yield and the quality aspects that fish hydrolysate is driving. But if you look at it from an economic standpoint of cost of what is in this barrel of nutrients, which we calculate as a cost per square foot of nutrient input costs, which is just if you've got 1,000 square foot building, that's 1,000 square feet we're calculating when I do these numbers. We don't subtract hallways. It's just, if you got a 10 by 10 room, that's how much square foot it is. Anyways, if you take something like general hydroponics, the last time I calculated for a farm, it was $1.65 per square foot using the traditional general hydroponics with the micros and standard formula. If you mix up fish hydrolysate, kelp, and humic, even at the commercial scales and totes, it's the identical cost to the general hydroponics strategy. And so when you compare that to other cultivation strategies, you're losing everywhere around. You're destroying your soil. It's as expensive as hydroponics, but maybe not getting the yield. And you're going to run into all hell breaking loose situation if you try to maintain that soil to make it more financially viable. If you look at like the Organics Alive soluble powders, so using the vegetative nitrogen, using the transition formula, using the bloom, using those products in combination with like a CalMag, We use a calcium boron product as well, and including a trace mineral. You can now be more comprehensive from a fertility standpoint, meaning all the main elements, all the minor elements, trace minerals, etc. We would call that a full fertility strategy. You can be more for full fertility than even people running mills or really expensive hydroponic nutrients. So when you start to calculate your cost to production from a nutrient input standpoint cost, something like general hydroponics is somewhere between $1.50 and $1.75 a square foot. If you're doing heavy 16 mills, house and garden, advanced nutrients at the label rates, you're somewhere between and we've seen as high as $3.50 a square foot. You know, some of the guys in the valley in Southern California would run SBA. You start getting 12, 13 products into a nutrient feed. You're now at $3.50 a square foot. You have a 0% chance of competing in any market. Organic, hydroponic, there's a 0% chance you're going to be financially viable. If you look at the Organics Alive soluble powders, which at first seem to have a high cost, when you're using very low amounts, like 1 gram per gallon, 1.5 grams per gallon, combined with other products, you can be as low as 50 cents per square foot, definitely well below $1 a square foot. So a typical like 4-6 light back bedroom, even like an 8 light back bedroom, you're not even going to use a pound of those powders in an entire harvest. And so you can definitely be well below $1 a square foot. In our commercial work, the absolute top of the top hydroponic farms that we've worked with that I would just literally define as famous dudes, the best that we've seen them do is about 60 to 70 cents a square foot. So the literal top 2 or 3 humans in all of hydroponics that have figured out how to do bag salts and whatnot have got down to about 60, 70 cents a square foot.
That was only like 1 or 2 people, though, I think.
Literally 2 people.
Yeah.
Literally 2 humans. And we're not in the name saying and stuff, whatnot, but you would know them for sure. And now you as a home gardener who doesn't have access to those types of things, you could do Organics Alive soluble powders with like our CalMag and a calcium boron, and you could be down like 50, 60 cents a square foot as a commercial facility. Obviously, if you're a little 4-lighter, it's going to be a little bit more because economies of scale. But nonetheless, on a cost per square foot production standpoint, there is nothing that I'm aware of that can compete with the input savings, the cost savings of using like the Organics Alive soluble powders combined with some of the other things that we use. We use a lot of BioAg TM7. We do use some Albion multimineral. Albion has had some ridiculous issues with quality lately, and somebody mentioned that they got bought out in the last year or two. We've damn near completely abandoned that product, but we got a long way on Albion multimineral. We've now using TM7, but nonetheless, it's important to factor in main elements, minor elements, and trace minerals. So calcium and magnesium, potassium and phosphorus, iron, manganese, copper, and zinc, boron. You have got to have those in there. So, yeah. So that's an important aspect. So for me, fish hydrolysate makes no sense in 2022, and it's only going to make things worse for you. From a biological standpoint, any of those thick, soupy nutrients, the BioBiz, Nectar of the Gods makes some good stuff, but it's very rich. And it's very difficult to manage the biological communities when you're dumping that much pulverized, processed, enzymatically designed dead fish parts and beet vinasse and all these crazy things that they put in these to get the, but to get the NPK values again, they really cram shit into those products. And when you go to, when you go to start analyzing the biology of those soil systems, it's almost always then driven into powdery mildew pressure because of how it negatively stimulates things that we want to minimize. So you have, in my opinion, there's no chance even going down a rabbit hole. Whereas like the Organics Alive powders gently stimulate and are non-detrimental. So it puts you into a position to minimize the volatility of the biological component of your soil system, whether you're managing it or not, it's happening. Yeah, BioAg did come out with a bunch of new products. They're doing a bunch of amino acid products, which is kind of cool. I noticed they got some calcium products. Clearly, they've been watching the show and have answered our request and are producing other accessible products for calcium base. Shout out to the dude that owns that. Can't remember his name, but you know who he is. So Cytoplus is just TM7 with humic acid. So it's a good product. I just prefer to get it without the humic acid, put my own humic acid in there. Yeah, and this is the deal. This is the most important part. You can cram the nutrition into the plant with those OA powders all the way up into a week and two harvest, and there is zero measurable flavor impact. There is zero impact on white ash. The shit is brilliant, man. Todd and Eric knocked it out of the park on bringing those products to market. The work that I have been doing on my side, so I provide feedback from analytics in the commercial space, which has led to the offering of the VK product. So that was a request of mine. I haven't seen it announced yet. It's still working on labeling, but they are working on a VP. So that'll be a phosphorus booster. That should be coming soon. I've got a sample of it already, so hopefully it gets labeled and is legal to sell pretty soon. But the thing that I like about Todd and Eric at Organics Alive is, I mean, they've come to every workshop we've ever put on. They've got their ear to the street. They're SoCal surfers. That's a different kind of human. And you just get in there and you get it done. And you're not afraid of, getting a wave smashed on your head. So they've been very interactive with our work. They've been very open with the feedback that we provided on their products. And they've adapted as such. And it has made my life better. It's made our clients better. And the flowers just better. So the reason why people keep cramming fish hydrolysate is you can get that bag appeal. If you ditch the fish hydrolysate, you can get, I think you can get better quality out of the Organics Alive powder. No questions asked. Yeah, it looks like Cytoplus also has kelp extract. Yeah, exactly. It's got some enhancements in there. I prefer to isolate things so I can put them in as I want. But if you're a small scale grower and you're trying to get all those things in there, it's beneficial for sure. Well, so what's crazy is, so I think what Smiley's asking about is the nitrogen in the Organics Alive powders. Now, if you use them all at like a couple teaspoons per gallon, that's where I kind of sway from the labels. I don't use them near as high as 1 to 2 teaspoons per gallon. Typically, I find in our system, we aim for somewhere between 50 and 80 or 90 parts per million in nitrogen when we analyze that liquid feed, which is maybe half, not even half. So I guess comparatively, if you're doing 60 milliliters per gallon of something like, oh man, brain fade. It's been so while. What is that Pacific Northwest fish hydrolysate, the good one?
Yeah.
Dude, it's been so long.
Pacific Grow.
Pacific Grow. Okay. Pacific Grow is one of the better quality products, and we've spent the most time with Pacific Grow. It gets rebranded by AEA, and they double the price, which is kind of cool. But Pacific Grow is the main component. And if most people we've worked with run that from 40 to 60 milliliters per gallon of fish hydrolysate, you might be as high as 200 to 300 parts per million of nitrogen taking that strategy. If you're doing like 2 grams per gallon of the VN and 1 to 2 grams per gallon of the transition and the PK, you're going to be less than 100 parts per million of nitrogen. So I think people are completely unaware of how much nitrogen they're contributing with those traditional strategies. So,
but again, we're relying and we're testing and we're making sure that we actually do have a soil food web because we lean on them for a lot of the nitrogen component and converting those, what we do add in there.
Yeah. And so that's another great point, right? So if you go to a Southern California hydroponic grower that's respected, they're probably somewhere between 200 and 350 parts per million of nitrogen in those feed recipes to get that 3-alite type yield. A lot of the guys that we worked with early on had success in hydroponics and did the transfer of numbers to the fish hydrolysate. That's how we got to these numbers. And so to match that 200 to 300 parts per million in that hydroponic reservoir, you're using 40, 50, 60 milliliters per gallon of fish hydrolysate. When you put that into a living soil system or a soil-based system, you can get the yield, but it's going to be at the consequence of your soil. It's going to be at the consequence of pest pressure.
And biology.
Without a doubt. Yeah, and so to me, we're running less than 100 parts per million in our fertilizer recipes, or nutrient feeds, we prefer to say. So yeah, I would jump on that. Where I start to vary from the label recommendations is I do everything on a gram basis. I don't like to use teaspoons because depending on who scoops the teaspoon, it can vary by 40% in weight. So I do everything in grams. The VN product seems to weigh sometimes more than 5 grams per teaspoon. Um, and exactly, for sure. 3-Alite was 2 years ago. We're well over that by now for sure, especially with some of these new lighting. But you get what I'm saying. Those markers for success. It's been a few years since I've done hydro. We stopped working with those guys a few years ago. But anyways, if you use the Organics Alive powders, I use it well less than 1 to 2 teaspoons per gallon. The vegetative nitrogen, we tend to run as much as 2 grams per gallon. I'd keep it below that. And then when you combine it with the transition and the PK, I don't use them individually. So I don't use just VN during vegetative and transition during transition and bloom during bloom. I use all 3 of them all the time. And I use them in different ratios to command different outcomes with potassium and phosphorus. But I would definitely try them. Try mixing them together. Maybe a decent starting point would be less than 2 grams per gallon on the VN and then less than 2 grams per gallon on the other 2 products. Kind of tinker around that range if you're up for it. If you want to get more in depth, we do take people all the way through the entire process as a farm. We analyze your water, we build a feed recipe, we quantify that feed recipe, and then we tune it based on the outcome and output. So that's what we do in our consulting work. Generally speaking, that's where I'd start. I think the Organics Alive FPF, that is something that we use at damn near every garden. Certain situations we'll use a different fulvic acid product, something like fertinitropulvic, so it's a dry powdered. Typically that's a square footage thing, so once we get above a certain size, we tend to move to 50-pound sacks of dry goods. But we do use the Organics Alive FPF. 1 mil per gallon is a great starting point. You can add that to all watering at about half to 1 milliliter per gallon, and you will see fantastic results. Don't get crazy. Don't do a couple mils in all water. Every now and then, if you want to do a couple mils, that's fine. But try doing like half a mil to 1 mil per gallon of the FPF in all water you feed your plants. And that shit will ball. Organics Alive, the FPF product, the fulvic acid, is also the best product I find as a pH down. So a lot of the transitional farmers coming from hydroponics are hyper-focused on pH. When we start to cram the amounts of calcium in there that you need in that liquid feed, the pH tends to be higher than 6 to 6.4. Somewhere between half and 2 milliliters per gallon of the FPF will drop that pH to exactly what you want. I think that's hands down the best use of that product. Hands down. And we use that at every farm that we work at. We're kind of slowly figuring out how to do a product-based business, and we just put it on our own website. But we've been selling the Organics Alive FPF. Shout out to the dude that decides to join to give a thumbs down. We love you too, man. You can be all right. I'm gonna hit you with a thumbs up. It's probably someone that sells fish hydrolysate. But
sorry about that.
I just think it's cool that someone chimes in to down like, what are you doing on a Wednesday night? You know what I mean? Come on, man, get a set of roller skates or something.
There's a question I wanted to answer up here.
Yeah.
Somebody had asked, how can I get my compost tested? I don't own or know how to properly use a microscope. There's many ways. We obviously offer microscope analysis to know what your different organism levels are. But there are many people that do out there right now. You can learn how to do it for yourself, but if you just want to quickly get it tested, we offer it, and many people offer that. So you can get on Elaine's website and look at the different labs that that are listed there, and then go from there as well. So, and then there's another question about what about using oats to grow out fungus? Good guys. Oats are a fungal food, but with any food source, there's going to be a threshold of where you'll stimulate them in a positive direction, and when there will be overstimulation and you end up going in the opposite direction. So if you don't have a microscope to know what that threshold is because you're looking, then I would just say err on a very, like a whiff of things. Because, if you can do a whiff, then,
What's a whiff, and what do you mean by that?
like you're sprinkling
Tiny sprinkling.
pepper.
Yeah, right.
Like pepper. Like you would add pepper to it. Well, I mean, I
Yeah.
guess some people like a lot of pepper, but, generally speaking, like you would add pepper, to a meal. Like that would be how much, where I would start with any type of a fungal food like that. So
Typically, so this is kind of the hard part for you guys viewing back into this is that, you're also looking at Instagram, you're looking at other social media sites, YouTube, and when you take those generally accepted application rates for products, and we come behind and work with that farm and tune these compounds back to an appropriate non-destructive level for biology that will lead to powdery mildew-free, pest-free gardens, typically we divide these things by 10 or so.
Yeah.
So like most of the Clackamas coot applications divide by 10. Anybody that's doing bokashi and oats and getting that fuzzy stuff, you don't want that, man. I know it's popular. People think I'm a jerk for saying that. Not one situation have I seen that to be really good. So you want to, if you see online somebody using a product, cut it by like 10, sprinkle it in, do it every week or so, start there. And you're welcome. This is an interesting question from Manscaped Solutions. No, just kidding. Mountainscape Solutions.
Mountainscape Solutions.
How
often
often
do you apply compost extract to soil? So you can get technical with this answer, when you're looking at it through a microscope and only as much as you need. But if you're not looking at it under a microscope and you're in a what would we call it, like a fast harvest system cycle, so you're going to be messing with the soil every couple of months. We tend to do it weekly or every other week, or we can do it more than weekly. So it just depends on where you're at. I would say weekly is a standard for any annual, fast-growing type crop. You can't go wrong with that, and you'll probably save yourself at that kind of a rate by making sure that they're there every time you put them in, on the weekly basis. So weekly is a good threshold.
Yeah. In our consulting work, we've done every range you can imagine with every type of farmer. And in my opinion, the frequency of extracts has to do with how often you're spraying IPM products. Yeah. And you could be wearing a regenerative hat, wearing a shirt that says I love microbes, and most of your strategies for dealing with powdery mildew and mites is nuking everything. If you're using neem oil, good luck. You're just wasting compost at that point. And so the reason why we say once a week is necessary because most people are spraying stuff once a week. And I think, the further I get from the first farm I ever got to see in public, the more grateful I am for that first group of cultivators that I worked with, because I did not come from a network of people that believed you should be spraying poison weekly. The guys that I learned from would light off a bug bomb week 2 of flower. I'm not saying one of the purple raid bug bombs was all that healthy or regenerative or safe, but the mindset wasn't I'm going to come in here and wage war. It was our plants are healthy, our feeds are dialed, we got good genetics, we're just going to try and kill everything in this room in week 2 so that we can get through harvest. And that worked. And a lot of those guys are still cultivating. I mean, not a lot of the guys. 2 of the guys are still doing major commercial projects and are still very respected in the industry. And sometime around 2010, definitely by 2012, this whole mindset of integrated pest management, weekly applications of poison came into vogue and popularity. And 100% of our analysis says this is the problem. This yellow book right here behind me called Healthy Crops, there you go, that one called Healthy Crops, is literally 250 pages of research from the 1950s and 60s that show that spraying agricultural chemicals breaks down the protein synthesis of the plant, makes them vulnerable to pests, and they die. And they start the dying process.
Wrong direction.
And so literally every time you go in to spray a product that is not nutrition, you are giving your plant diarrhea at best. And I try to make somewhat crass analogy of like if you're trying to be a professional bodybuilder and you have 2 people going for that goal, one of those people is eating clean food and vitamins and supplements, they're probably going to get there much sooner. If you've got somebody that's living on a diet of Wiener Schnitzel corn dogs, they're probably not going to get there, and they're probably going to have liquidated bowels. And that's exactly what happens in a plant. Well, a couple things are happening. With a microscope, you can measure a plant literally taking pest management products and depositing them in the root zone, trying to get them out of its body. And so you can measure that decline in organisms in the soil from that compound being flushed into the roots. So that plant is desperately trying to detoxify itself and get those compounds out of it. When a plant is spending its energy on detoxifying and recovering from your pest management strategy, it is not growing yield. And every farm that has great success with our process are farmers that are able to understand that you can, in fact, manage soil biology, you can manage soil chemistry, and you can substitute pest management products for nutritional products and navigate yourself into a very comfortable, profitable existence. The farmers that we don't have success with, or less than our potential of success with, typically will not stop spraying some sort of pest management product. And I see those farms every day getting weeded out and weeded out. I promise you, you will not financially be able to afford the future and lower market prices and higher costs if you are spending your energy and your labor and your dollars on things that do not provide a benefit for your plant. Spraying for killing bugs does not benefit your plant. So kind of a little rant there that might get us shut off. But nonetheless, what are your thoughts on beneficial insects? I think it's essential. I think it's the best thing that ever happened to it. Most farmers don't do it because they go spray for bugs. And so nobody wants to buy bugs and then spray for bugs. And so it takes a pretty significant leap of faith to be able to switch to a beneficial insect mindset. Now, having said that, if you're using a bagged soil that has atrocious soil chemistry and you're pounding it with irresponsible levels of nutrients, you can't just stop spraying Suff Oil and throw beneficial insects and everything's going to be groovy. You have to manage the underlying issues of nutrition with that plant in order to make that transition, which is why most people are honestly offended when you recommend or suggest the concept of pest-free cultivation. And because they've been under fire their entire career. Well, yeah, that's because your soil's bullshit and your nutrient strategy is dysfunctional as hell. That's why you have bugs. So, I don't know. We still do use products that kill bugs, but we use them at a one-time application. We call it a knockdown. So you identify a pest, you make a knockdown application of an appropriate product, and then you immediately correct for the detriment that that pest control product did. So you provide nutrition, you provide fulvic acid, you accelerate recovery. You can use the fermented castor bean oil from Organics Alive, which will accelerate metabolism and cleanse that plant out. And then you need to address the underlying issues. You need to get soil chemistry at least close to the goal, and you need to figure out what it is you're providing as nutrition, whether it's a dry top dress or a liquid feed. You need to get that into some reasonable realm of balance for your plants. And then you can have a shot of just subbing in beneficial insects.
I was going to make a comment here on Smiley. It said, grow the oats out. It makes your own straw for mulch. It made me realize that I should be a little bit more clear about when you said, whoever mentioned the applying of oats to grow, stimulate beneficial fungi. In my mind, I pictured flour, oat flour. Like you'd be sprinkling it on like oat flour as like a top dress. If you're thinking about oat seed itself, you'd go about it the same way, but that's going to be a much more concentrated dose of oat. So you might actually still get some fuzzies if you do that. So oat flour is what I had in my mind.
And I would advocate growing oats. We grow oats, barley, rye all the time. Sometimes ryegrass is a little bit of a monster, but those seeds sprout. It grows a really nice, fast-growing grass. You wait till it gets about a foot tall, and then you lay it over or you mulch it. It's a fantastic way to start a living soil system. It's like a big diesel boat engine. You got to get that thing running, and once it's running, hopefully it won't shut off. And you can produce a tremendous amount of growth potential if you figure out what are the components needed to get this engine started effectively, and what is it that I'm doing that's negatively affecting the functions of this motor that's providing plant growth responses. So, right on. Well, I think we've gotten about an hour. Give it a few more bits to see if there's any other questions that pop through. As always, we appreciate those of you that have joined us.
Yes,
Even
definitely.
those that joined to give a thumbs down. We do see you, and we do
It looked like
appreciate
they
you.
popped back over to the thumbs up, though. So
It did.
I
Well,
bet.
because somebody else threw it in. It was me. I clicked my own thumbs up. Hey, man, you got to be able to support yourself. But yeah, man, we just appreciate the people that do tune in. We were at 454 subscribers, which I meant to make a shout out for hitting the pound, and we're now up to a grower's pound. We got 463. That's pretty cool. So shout out to you 463 rad human beings that think we know what we're talking about. We hope that we've provided value for you, and that we've at least caused you to go into your grow room and go, what is it I'm doing, and where can I improve? And what can I do to make this process more enjoyable, more regenerative, more sustainable, and honestly more respectable to humans? If you're pounding that plant with pesticides, that's not respectable to your humans. And I think a lot of those people that are really cramming some of the chemicals are kind of losing their opportunity to grow.
Yeah,
I
so
am
did
doing
we...
good. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for tuning
Oh,
in.
nice. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
So somebody's asking about an oat sprouted CT. I haven't done that. The sprouted CTs do work, but a lot of people, you can't forget Sarah.
Thank you.
A lot of people massively overdose on those sprouted CTs. Back when we still kind of incorporated that thing, back in like 2017, we found that the alfalfa sprouted CT was by far the most volatile and the most overused, that led to russet mites. It was really common for people to make up a 5-gallon batch and water a 4x8 bed with 5 gallons of that. You'll get a fantastic growth response, but you literally just ripped the guts out of that plant and made it insanely vulnerable to pests. And that's most of the people that got russet mites through that era made heavy applications of the sprouted CTs. The one I used the most was the corn or the barley. They were the most low volatility, but again, the application rates are way too high. We would typically do like a half a cup of a corn or barley sprouted CT to like a 65-gallon pot. That was still kind of in the era. And so, if you've got a 4x4 bed with 6 plants in it, I wouldn't put more than 2 cups in that entire bed personally. So that's where people get crossed up. They make this big old 5-gallon batch and they want to use it. Very detrimental. Can be very powerful, but again, people are like tenfold too high on everything pretty much.
Yeah.
And we've done kind of a insane amount of analysis of these different trends and techniques and tried to figure out safe application rates and functional usages of these trends, and finding a way.
And if they're useful trends.
Yeah, and if it's actually a useful trend.
Yeah. So we're not really married to, the only thing that we're married to is...
Me.
Well, I'm married to you for sure, but the only thing that ideologically we're married to is the health and just the highest outcome. And that is also correlated to this biological balance in the soil microbes and the mineral balance in both the minerals themselves and the nutrition that we feed the plants. So that anything else, that's the benchmark. The microbes will tell us whether or not we're winning in that, and the plant response as well. So you'll see it in the plant response, right? This is a logical conclusion, right? So hopefully we're coming in with, wrapping this up with what success actually is, right? We want the highest outcome, good yields with the highest potency and that delicious flour and veggies or whatever else, whatever it is you're growing, right?
Yeah. We're trying to just make success, because if you haven't been paying attention, the market's clamping down. And so unless you're just like a hobbyist, 4x4 tent grower, if like you're trying to pay your bills this way, it is no longer time to be casual about this. Like you have to FFIO of what it is you're going to do. And I'm not saying you got to read 100 books like Nerdy Sarah and I did, but like you got to at least sit and look at your cultivation facility and say, what is it I'm doing? What is it that needs to be improved here? And what can I do to reduce my footprint, reduce my damage to the environment? What can I do to provide health to humans? You know,
Yeah.
giving people systemic fungicides and biocontrol products, that's not helpful to anybody's health. And you can do that in a living soil system and still cause problems to human health. And so,
And I guess that's the message we're really trying to get across is that regenerative isn't just words. This isn't just like, oh, let's do this process. It's what is that process leading to in the outcome?
Exactly.
Because if it's not leading to ultimate health of both the plant and every organism that feeds off that plant in succession, then we're missing the mark. And that really is what we're talking about here as a marker of success when we're doing these regenerative approaches, right?
Exactly.
So you just need to be very strategic at this point in history. Never before in history has it mattered so much to reduce the toxic input, of our footprint on this planet. So, I don't think that we're at a point where our children, our offspring can tolerate, and 7 generations down, can tolerate the rate at which we're, putting in
scooping
these
peat moss out of the ground.
Putting these toxic compounds, and I won't go off on that tangent because I've done that before, but you know what I'm saying.
That's what they come
It's a
for,
call to
Sarah.
action.
That's
It's
what
a
they
call
come
to
for.
action. And it's really to put it out there that you can strategically use nutrition and biology, but you have to know what it is that you're doing, figure, what are those benchmarks, and then you'll see it in the microbial populations and you'll see it in the plant health and thus your health and your smoking experience.
Yep.
So it will be moulala.
Ooh la la. Can't beat it. True J is asking about FCB. I only use FCB completely by itself at very low rates. I don't go more than 1 mil per gallon. Definitely don't use it more than once per week. And I don't even use it a lot of weeks in a row. It's something that we use at very strategic points. My most common application rate would be 1 milliliter per gallon of the FCB product. Most important with that product, if you spray it on the plant, it's extremely beneficial. It increases the efficiency of the mitochondria, or the energy producing portion of the cells of your plant, makes them like 50% more efficient. It's fantastic. If you take that same liquid solution, pour it into a soil, it will lock the shit out of all of your phosphorus. All nutrients need phosphorus to get into the plant. You will cause problems. So it's really common muscle memory for farmers to make up a foliar solution, spray a little bit on their plant, and then water the plants with it. Don't do that with the FCB. Make up a tiny amount, lightly spritz it, and then pour the rest somewhere else, or make small enough batches that you're not wasting it. The most common use case of that product for us is when we're trying to repair plants. That's the first thing I'll do. I'll spray it with a light dose of FCB to increase its ability to overcome adversity. And then I'll start supporting overcoming adversity. So hitting it with Provita, hitting it with Kelpzyme, and then proper nutrition is what I would do. Spraying moms every couple weeks is a good way to use FCB. Spraying your plants the first day or two after transplant is a good way to use FCB, or after a very stressful event. That's usually when I use it.
Yeah.
So, right on, friends, families, guardians of the planet. No
Yes.
pressure.
No
No
pressure.
pressure. It's literally in your hands,
Our
cannabis
fate
farmers.
is in your hands.
Our
dude.
whole fate. The people that grow our food, they're not going to do it. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. No pressure. No pressure.
But it can be done, and it can be fun, and you can make
Yeah.
money doing it as well. We can still have a good
Yeah.
economy based on no toxic inputs.
So here's an interesting question. We've been shitting on peat moss for the last hour and a half. It's like, how would you make a potting soil without it? And honestly, I wouldn't. There's certain components that need to be there. What I would say is don't be wasteful with that soil. Protect it and keep it forever.
Yeah.
There's people in the industry that are in 10, 20, well, there's like one farm that's at like 20 harvest cycles. So shout out to them for being that disciplined about maintaining that soil. That's a goal that probably no one will beat for a while.
Yeah, we got
Probably take a leveling earthquake of that facility for somebody to pass them at this point. So, but nonetheless, I would say protect that soil and maintain it and just scoop it out once. So scoop out a little bit of coco coir and peat moss to make that substrate and then build over time. And at some point, maybe we'll start to find a substitution, but I think right now we need to baby step towards functional goals. And so I think the real crux of, or the real kind of limiting tendency of the regenerative community is to make these massive leaps into these really ideological techniques that just are not functional at all. And so I think you need to start with something that works and then don't break it. So if you put a permanent soil in one time and you maintain that for the life of the garden, I think that's a great step towards sustainability and regeneration. Whereas your neighbor that's been buying soil and doing it every time, they're just not going to make it anyways. So I think the market is slowly making the organic community be more regenerative in that if you're buying soil every time, you're just not going to make it financially. So you need to figure out how to manage that chemistry and work with it. Because when you talk about maintaining mineral chemistry of a soil, if you buy your own minerals, you're less than $10 per cubic yard per harvest cycle to re-amend that soil. On up to $20, $30 in like the most extreme situations, something like that. But extremely affordable to maintain a soil is what I'm trying to get after. So
that nutritional component is very important. And the microbes with that nutrition and the minerals is really, I just want to stress how important that is, because at this point in history, we have to be very mindful about the nutrition that's coming into the system. We have to remember we are a higher level predator. We need our plants to be much higher in nutrition than they are now. I mean, we've lost a ton of nutrition in our soil systems. And so at this point in time, we have to be very mindful and strategic about putting that nutrition back so that generations behind us can enjoy, being healthy and not being taken out with cancers and autism and all kinds of crazy stuff. So
I think it's important on this one. It says I keep bouncing back and forth thinking I got this and then being overwhelmed with the complexity.
Oh yeah, we were going to mention something like that, because people get overwhelmed when they're trying to be strategic and working with microbes. Yeah.
About once a year, I have a situation in my consulting work that causes me to question my entire reality. And it's just part of the process. And usually the point where you think you got it figured out is when you'll get one of those karmic kicks to the dick. And, it happened to me last week. I was doing a financial projection and my shit was spinning for 2 days. I was stuck in this spreadsheet for 2.5 days questioning my entire reality. And I think those are just the points that are allowing you to examine because you're going to a different level.
Yes.
And as you learn more components, it becomes more complex and you're aware of the complexity and you're able to manage that complexity. I think the reason why this living soil thing has gotten so popular is people realize they need to do less and make it less complex. And we're just extremely technical people, so when we're trying to explain a very simple way of farming, it probably does come off very complex.
Yeah, and I realize, coming from a medical background, I'm used to labs. I'm used to some sort of benchmark guiding my decision making, while still using intuition. So if something says that you have enough calcium, but functionally you don't, then you don't look at the monitor and goes, well, it says you have enough oxygen, but you're blue. Clearly you don't have enough oxygen. So there's a balance to that as well. But
yeah. And you do, yeah. So this is the big thing. I would say that to be a successful cannabis farm, you got to make it through the first 3 harvests. It seemed that most people really start tripping up around 2 and 3 in my experience. That's been at every farm everywhere. And so you really got to get through 3 harvests, in my opinion. Yeah. And the way you do that is you just start out with the foundational principles. At minimum, do a soil chemistry analysis. I prefer the Malic 3 from Logan Labs. We get the full comprehensive, complete plus extras. I guess they call it standard test now, but standard test plus extras. I think getting the bulk density value is essential. That tells you how heavy your soil is so that the recommendations can actually be accurate. And then providing your data in ppms makes it easier for the person calculating it, and it makes it easier to associate the different data points. So start there and correct that. If you do that well, you can just water it and give a little aloe vera and have pretty good results and not blow up in your face. From there, start to build. And I think the important part for any farm or any business or any human activity is to make small foundational changes moving towards the goal that layer on each other. I think where people get extremely turned sideways is they're doing so much stuff that they can't figure out what's helping or hurting. And that's why this whole Masanobu, living soil, do nothing became popular, because if you took somebody that was struggling with bottles and you put them on a no-till water only, they usually made way better quality flour. But from there, you can't just do nothing. You now need to manage that system, and it has different characteristics. So in hydroponics, you have to manage the moisture in your media, and you need to manage pH and chemistry and whatnot. So there's just other things that you need to maintain. You can't just like put a piece of straw in your mouth and say nature's going to handle it while inside of a back bedroom of your grandma's house. Like, nature's not in there doing it for you. You got to get in there and perform natural functions for that soil, especially if you're going to ask it to do something insanely unnatural like 4 consecutive summer crops in a row without any winter. So I guess with that.
Well, and I would just say we have many ways to utilize our knowledge. So we offer all these for free, so you can gain as much as you can from this. But we do soil recommendations, we do precision custom blending of minerals.
Yep.
We do, and that's all on our website. You can get bioassays from us, so that at least for the first time when you're really trying to learn this and really get it under your belt, you can plug in, piece by piece by just, getting the testing with us or maybe a
Mineral
consulting.
rec,
You get consulting with the mineral recommendation and the bioassay. So, there's different ways to plug in with us if you want that level, or you can go, all the way up on that with working with us too. So if we can be of help to you in learning the system, we're happy to do it. We've got many ways at whatever level you're at, if you're a tent grower or a big commercial facility. So don't think if you're too small that you're, not worth our time. You're absolutely, if you are here, you are worth our time. So just wanted to put that out there.
Heck yeah. So we got a couple people sounding off the same question about making their own humic acids. So doing it from your compost, biological compete. Yeah, those are in there. I just think that there's a secondary need for supplying those without the biological organic matter aspect of it. And so the reason why we use other manufactured products, we'll say, is because you can get a tremendous amount of benefit supplying a tiny amount of fulvic acid by itself. Yeah. And so whether you're foliar feeding that or applying a small reasonable dose to your fertigation water, you get a tremendous amount of benefit. And then there's certain situations where if you extract your own humic and fulvic from your own compost, there's biology in there. And if you put it into a tank or run it through lines, you're then going to make disease. So that would be a worse choice from that contextual standpoint. So I let my compost be my compost. I let my extract be my extract. I still add a slight bit of fulvic and humic. I prefer Provita in the compost extract. Even small amount, like 1 to 2 teaspoons per gallon to a compost extract, will lead to 20 to 30% better establishment of organisms. That's available on our CGG distro website for those that are familiar with that. That's a tremendously high quality product that does pretty magical things, honestly. So I think there's different needs, and we're not the ones that want to just do these really extreme regenerative practices. I'm perfectly fine with buying fulvic acid from Organics Alive and using it to my advantage. That product is used at such low concentration rates. I'm okay with shipping those liquids, and it's made from fermented grains. So they're taking a byproduct of agriculture. They're turning it into a nutrient for you. I'm on board with that. I want to support those types of things so that they can continue into the future and support me into the future. So I'm into those types of things. If you have, like we've had hydroponic growers in Southern California that were well respected, that had a hard time moving from black market days spraying Eagle 20, moving into the regulated space where you could not use any of those things. If we put them on an aloe vera, fulvic acid, potassium silicate foliar, the mold went away, and every single one of them was completely shocked at what we did with that. And so to me, fulvic acid is a tremendous tool that just pulling it from your compost is not gonna do that, you know. So I think it's great to have enough in there. Yeah, there's a lot of conversations about pump sprayers. The reason why I don't talk about equipment is because we've had situations where I have talked about equipment and then we fire up a new consulting client and they can't buy that equipment because it's sold out because everybody on YouTube went and got it. Or Build a Soil starts carrying it and they just start copying what we do. And so a lot of times I don't talk about those tools because people just start copying immediately and then it makes it unavailable for me. I realize that's selfish, but that's the answer. The other thing with pump sprayers, it's a complete nightmare. The general trend is look towards the pest control professional tools and something that you can put a tip in. So I've had a lot of conversation about this in the last week. There's a couple people that have asked for specifics. So I will make a video, and I apologize in advance to our clients when those products are sold out. Just general why your spray equipment is not helping you get to your goal. Maybe that'll be the next video after Smiley. So next week, I believe we're going to have Smiley on. We're going to attempt to do our first interview guest. So that'd be pretty cool. Smiley was nice enough to allow me on his podcast a while back. And I'm really proud of that episode because it was the only episode I ever did anywhere that got 0 thumbs down. And YouTube, because of this whole quarantine thing and the crazy news stories, did away with the thumbs down count. But that was a pretty cool thing that it shows you who Smiley is and the people that hang out with him. They're just nice people. So we wanted to start with him and get him on the show. I really appreciate how he's real. He's the only person, in my opinion, one of the only people, in my opinion, that has a voice and a platform that speaks completely with reality. I jumped on his channel a couple days ago to try to catch up. I haven't been able to consume much other content. And he was showing plants that straight up died in his garden. There's nobody that does that. And I think that dude needs a special medal and a special trophy for flat out having the nuts to be authentic. There's almost nobody in this regenerative hat wearing community that's really authentic, in my opinion. And I think that's an extremely rare human that's just straight up like, yeah, this one died, sucks. Maybe we can try and figure out why it died and come up with something valuable. So, right on. Well, boys and girls, well, I guess I want to end on this one. So, Dr. F from BioAg talks about vortexing water. Got any food for thought on that? Yes. We are hippies. We got some hippie shit right there. I think that's Ganesh. We got another little dude there. We got some singing bowls. We're definitely on board with spiritual stuff and energy patterns of the planet. Definitely.
That's quantum as well, physics as well.
Quantum physics. And I do...
electromagnetic beings. So.
Totally. And it is important. And energy is important. And it's my belief that the energies of the different layers of our universe pass through the water. So it's extremely important to have those energies in the water. Nonetheless, back out of the rabbit hole a little bit. In practice, what happens is 110% of the farms that build a vortexing piece of equipment will battle powdery mildew. And they battle powdery mildew because this animal that we classify in as oomycete loves that piece of equipment. I don't give a shit how much H2O2, ozone, xeritol, I don't give a shit what you put in there. You are not going to overcome that animal growing, doing exactly what it does, which is be a water mold in valves and pumps and pipes. Then guys start to put nutrients in there because they want to vortex the nutrients and the powdery mildew goes up. I don't even work with a lot of cocoa growers because they love vortexing tank. Good luck talking them out of the powdery mildew disaster that they create in that stupid ass tank. So I don't believe, I think you should stay away from that.
By stupid ass, he means it's constantly causing problems.
Dude, it's literally the problem. And like cocoa growers battle a lot of powdery mildew. It's because they're vortexing shit, thinking they're getting the effects of the environment. We worked with a farm that talked about it. I can't, well, back out. Bleep. Can't do that. I almost really broke the violation rules. But nonetheless, even farms that are telling you it's worked, we've worked with them and it isn't working there.
Well, and then at what level are we really being,
yeah, no.
placebo effect can have it. But But not saying that vortexing has a placebo effect. I'm just saying that the mind can, you can see what you're looking for
Yeah.
sometimes when it's may or may not be there. However, I will say that structuring water, we have seen
Yeah.
and seen some research. We follow biophysicists and things like that talk about structuring water, and we feel that there are better ways to do that than through the vortex brewer. So
Yeah.
there are many ways to do that can be very effective and less expensive on some of these ways to do it. So yeah, we're fans of structuring water, absolutely. Living water and that energy in it that that gets taken out through all of our pipes. We think that you should absolutely structure water and get back to that energy and that living
No,
water.
loving too. I think it's
Loving, yeah, it's all the same.
Kind of funny, kind of funny stat about our consulting work is if you tell like a regenerative farmer that they need like a device that structures their water, usually they think you're corny. And we've had 0 organic, regenerative, hippie, heady farmers get water structuring devices that are proper commercially produced products. We've worked with a good handful of major hydroponic cultivators, predominantly from Southern California, which are the furthest from the headies and the dreadlockies, and they do it. And I think that's a pretty funny thing about our work is that like the organic crew wants to do it in a tank, which is 100% guaranteed to make you moldy. But when we suggest like a device, we've had 0 people bite on that, and we've worked a handful of hydroponic people that swear by them. I don't know, just kind of food for thought. I think we got about all we got out of this one. We're starting to get down the rabbit hole, and I'm almost breaking the rules. And loose lips, shink, ships.